Hi, this video is part of a research project for my master thesis named Unsupervised STTP-based learning using neuromorphic circuits. I won't talk about the project in this video. Today I wanted to talk about the representation of information into spiking neural networks. So how to encode and decode information, and also focus on the question why, because I think it's not obvious at first sight. So if you're watching the video, you're probably already aware of the subject, and you might have heard of temporal code and rate code. I will talk about it, of course, but I'll try to be a bit broader and to start from scratch, but also present some biology papers related to the subject. I think it's important to know why and how to pick an encoding method among other methods, but it's also very interesting to delve into how the brain processes information, and that's what I'll try to do in this video. So you might recognize here a very simple classic common neural network. It's a mathematical model of a neuron with the inputs, which is continuous real number, and then there's a matrix products with the weights and a simple sum function. The summation is modulated with an activation function, and then the output. So very, very simple. What we have to be aware is the information is processed from the beginning to the end as a real continuous numbers. So there's most of the time there's no problem of translation of information, because the input data most of the time is also real continuous numbers. So for instance, with this 0 from the minis dataset, you can directly feed it into the neural networks. Most of the time we use filters like convolutional filters or mathematical process like normalization or stuff like that. But you can feed it into the neural networks directly, because they use the same, they have the same quantities, so real continuous numbers. But this is not the case for spiking neural networks. So here we can see a very simple mathematical model of a spiking neuron. So there's weights, there's a sum, there's activation function, it's the same. But the mathematical environments where the spiking neuron is defined is very significantly different, because it's not real continuous numbers, but it's based around spikes. So it's a temporal based environments where the information is conveyed through spikes, which are all or none. So this means that there's a spike at a time t, or there's no spike, and because the information, most of the time, information in the real world is not into spikes. Obviously, you will have to, at the time in your algorithm, you will have to translate the information into spike trains. And so, for instance, you will have to translate these images, which is a pixel with value between 0 and 255. So this is a short answer to why you have to encode information and why this is an important subject in spiking neural networks. And a very simple answer you would likely to say is to represent information in the number of spike. So it's related to rate code, because for instance, let's take a white pixel, so a high pixel value, let's say 200. We could say that it will be represented into 200 spikes in the spike train, whereas a dark pixel will be represented only with no spikes, or only few spikes, and it might work. In fact, as I said, it's related to rate code, but it might be slow or not enough accurate, or it will create issues with the time window. But it's still an interesting similarity between ANN and SNN. In fact, Mass in 1997 demonstrated that ANN, so classic common artificial neural networks, are just a particular case of spiking neural networks. So they are included in spiking neural networks, and as a consequence, SNN would be at least as powerful as ANN. But this is a mathematical demonstration, and this is still not the case in the state of the art. I mean, at least for most of the benchmark. A simple and naive answer would be also that SNN aim to be brain-like. They try to mimic the brain. So let's just mimic how the brain does and ask biologists how the information is processed in the brain, how the information is represented into the brain, and that's a naive question I've tackled myself in this project. Because here start the big deals. In fact, this is still a very active debate. There's no scientific consensus on the subject. So sadly, you won't have a very simple answer on the question. As you may know, neurons use action potential to communicate with each other. The action potentials, also called spikes, are all or none phenomenon. This means that at the time t there's a spike, or there's no spike, kind of a binary state, and the spike travels through the axon right here, and it is transmitted to post neurons through synapses, and because the spike is believed to be a all or none phenomenon and to have a all or none behavior, this means that the information can't be encoded through the magnitude nor the shape of the spikes, and it has to be encoded through another way because it's believed to be all or none. This means that even if there's a slightly, because its biology is not perfect, so even if there's a slightly difference in the magnitude of the spike or in the shape of the spikes, it is believed that the impact on post neurons will be always the same. And so this means that the information has to be encoded in the precise time of the spike, or in the number of spikes, or in other less intuitive methods, but not in the magnitude nor the shape. So I like this image. I reuse this image. I have taken from a talk of Jason Schragen in 2021, because it sums up quite well the situation. The information can be encoding in the precise time of the spike, which leads to temporal code, or it can be encoding in the number of spikes, so it leads to rate code. And there's also other methods, but they are much less well known and much less used. So yes, this is just an image to make you remember the situation. So in this video, I represent first rate code and temporal code through latency code. Those two methods are very simple and easy to understand, you will see. And then I'll try to present burst code and burst coding and phase coding, which are less well known, but very interesting, I think. And then I will dive into rate codes and temporal codes, and also present briefly population codes by exploring both computation and biological aspects. So first, rate coding. If in rate coding, the information is transmitted through the number of spikes, as I said before. So through the number of spikes produced over a period of time. So this is through the number of spikes or the frequency of firing rate. So this is very, very easy to understand. The higher the value to be encoded, the higher will be the frequency or the number of spikes. And what we have to be aware of is the time between spike is not necessarily regularly. Most of the time we use Poisson generator, which add stochastic parameter into the codes in order to have an irregular time between spikes. Now comes to temporal codes. This is still very easy to understand. The information here is transmitted through the precisely timed pattern of spikes. So I'll talk about latency codes, and here in latency code, the higher the value to be encoded, the faster or the sooner will be the spike. And I won't say more about those coding methods right now, because I will give more explanation in few slides. But this is a very appreciated method because it's very fast, and it does not imply that much spikes, and spikes are energy consuming. So yes, this is appreciated in neuromorphic circuits and neuromorphic computing. Then let's talk about burst coding. So burst refers to a rapid sequence of spikes in a short period of time. Basically, this is a group of spikes. And here the information is transmitted through both the number of spikes and also the spikes interval. So this is called ISI. And this means that this is not a rate code. This is different from rate code because even if there's four, for instance, here in this picture, there's both of the signals have 4 spikes, but they are likely to encode to occur different information, to carry different information because the ISI is different. So the spike interval is different. Yes, that's pretty all about burst coding. And now let's talk about phase coding. So this coding method is very interesting because it has biological evidence. I mean, not that the previous one don't have biological evidence, but I will focus on them later. And also, this method is, I personally think that this method is much less intuitive, and but it makes it very elegant. So John Lisman in 2005 argued that theta and gamma oscillations form a coding scheme that is used in the hippocampus. So he conducted his studies on rats to propose that the phase encoding scheme would allow the hippocampus to use past experiences to anticipate future locations, aiding navigation and memory retrieval. So phase coding is based on referencing oscillation to encode information. It may look like a temporal code because there is an information in the latency relative to an oscillation phase, but because it's periodic, it will not work. Each spikes from each neurons would be separated from the same amount of time, so there won't be a spike before another one. It would not make sense. In fact, the information is encoded in both the number of spikes per period and in the spike patterns because the PSP, so the postsynaptic potentiation, depends on the phase of the oscillation function. So for instance, if the spike occurs right here, the PSP, the postsynaptic potentiation, might be higher than if the spike occurs right here. I won't talk about how to implement it. So this image deals with the implementation from Park in 2019. And it do not use an oscillation, but it works the same because the PSP is modulated through spike patterns. So now we have presented few different encoding methods, but we still don't know which one to use. So we know, we are aware now that there's different methods, but which one to use? Why would we use one rather than another one? And Guo, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce the name, but Guo in 2021, they've done a very great job in this paper because they've done a comparative study on NIST and fashion NIST datasets on those 4 different encoding methods. And the paper deals with neuromorphic computing, so they've done a comparative study comparing many different criteria, such as consumption, area surface required, robustness to noise, accuracy achieved, and so on. And yeah, I recommend you to read the paper if you're into the subject because this is very interesting and they've done a great job. So the main result is, as we might guess, that time to first spike coding, so this is a temporal code, provide the best performance, computational performance with low hardware implementations compared to rate code, because it's fast and pretty easy to implement. And what is much less intuitive is that phase coding is the most resilient scheme to input noise. And finally, burst coding offers the highest the best overall robustness to hardware non-idealities. So yes, that's the main results. But if you want to know more about it, just go on the link and read the paper, I think. So I provide here two very simple way to implement rate code and latency code. So we see the two formulas which are very, very simple, and that's also probably why they are very they are the most well-known coding techniques, and they are really used, the most used. So I wanted to present population coding because this is very interesting method allowing to code information with more robustness by creating redundancy. And also it allows to mix codes. So with population code, you can, for example, use rate code for the input layer, and for decoding in the output layer, you can use temporal codes and use a population code with redundancy in order to still have robustness to noise. So till now, I've been talking about coding or encoding, but not that much about decoding. In fact, this is not really common and used, but this is not forbidden to mix codes. So you can have a particular method in the input layer to encode information and have a different method to decode information. You might have heard of Ariane 5, the Ariane 5 accident in 1996, sorry, which was in fact caused by, which is known to be caused by a code mixing 64 bits float and 16 bits signed integer. So by mixing code, mixing code is not admired in computer science, but here it's very different, of course. And I've only used it to depict the fact that it's not usual, but it's not forbidden, of course. And so that's what that's why I like population codes, which allow great benefits from multiple codes by mixing them. And yes, that's all. So here I've read many different papers in order to find biological evidence supporting one method or another, but it seems not that simple, as I've explained previously. There's no scientific consensus on the matter, and the more you're reading, the more you get lost, in fact, and you don't really know what to think, because there's biological evidence in fact every encoding methods. So rate code has long dominated the debate. In fact, at first, initially, there were no debates. The Lord Adrian, in the beginning of the 20th century, he got a Nobel Prize for recording a single neuron. He found that the frequency or the rate of the nerves impulses varies with the intensity of the stimulus. And plus, there's also many other papers, famous papers, like the one from Hubble in 1961, where he found that, he studied neurons from cats' visual cortex, and he found about receptive fields and about the fact that the firing rate of neurons is related to different visual stimulus. Plus, there's well-known ramping cells, which are neurons known for having firing rate relative to an event. So the closer the event, the higher the frequency. And yeah, so there's a lot of different papers supporting the rate code, but there's also papers like the one from Gessner in 1997, dealing with sound localization of certain bird predators. And because of the extremely short amount of time required for localization, this suggests temporal rate code, as the rate code would be too slow. And Torps also in 1996, which is a very pro-temporal, he found that the information in the human visual cortex is too fast for rate coding, so it would suggest faster coding, such as temporal code. And I've also read an interesting paper about population code in the monkey brain. So Georgopoulos in 1986 argues that the direction of the monkey arm can be predicted only by the action of a population of motor cortical neurons and not by single neuron. But a contradictory argument would be that some insects are far too few neurons to use a population code. So here, with all those papers, plus the one about theta gamma oscillation phase code I've talked about right before, do not point toward the fact that the information is encoded in the single same way, but more in the way that the brain encode information in different ways depending on the area. So it might point and highlight the fact that there's multiple possible ways to encode information, and it depends on the application. And in fact, this is probably the same for spiking neural networks for computation, because, for instance, temporal code is known to be faster with a better power efficiency, but it's also known to be sensible to noise. So according to your applications, you will pick temporal code or not. Rate code is more robust to noise, but and also it's easy to implement, but it requires a lot of spikes, so it's slower, and also it has a higher energy consumption. And population code, because you can do a mix of rate code and temporal code. It has the speed of temporal code and the robustness of rate code thanks to redundancy, but it requires a lot of neurons, and so a lot of it has a high energy consumption. So I think as a conclusion, what we might remember from this video, if you want to remember something, is there is no consensus, scientific consensus at least, on the way the information is encoded in the brain, and the more appropriate methods to encode information and also to decode information depends on the application. And so you will always have to be aware of every different methods in order to know which one to use according to your applications. I think that's all. The video is already pretty long, so I hope you enjoyed it. It will be benefits for you, and I will present more part of the subject of the project in future videos.